Hello, and thank you very much for watching this video to learn how to recognize and address sexism and sexual violence. This training is brought to you by togetHER. We are a feminist collective that launched in March 2023, so we're just over a year old, with volunteers qualified in psychology, law, teaching, marketing, media, charity management, and much more. What's our mission? It is to end sexism and sexual violence. What are our values? First, we are inclusive. We welcome everyone, regardless of their gender, sexuality, class, race, or experience. We believe sexism and sexual violence can affect everyone, and we would all benefit from a society free from prejudice and discrimination. We are also non-violent. We create a safe and kind space. Our actions are not violent, and we protect our members from violence. Finally, we are non-political, so we are not affiliated to any political party. Nous Toutes in France is a sister collective of togetHER. They are a very successful collective which trained over 110,000 people on sexism and sexual violence in France. They inspired us, and that's why you will hear some French accents today. We hope to continue to have volunteers from everywhere so we can enjoy many more accents. This video is a recording of our very first online training. We organize free training sessions online and in real life, so do check our social media and our website to see when our next training sessions are coming up. To spread the word and make sure as many people as possible benefit from this training, do talk about us on social media to increase our visibility. Please post about the training and tag us at together_against_sexism on Instagram. And if you want to help us bring this training to even more people, please consider donating. You can do so on our website. So I think we're now ready to start our training to end sexism and sexual violence. Here is the content of the training that you're seeing on the screen. So we will start with key facts and figures. Then we will talk about the difference between conflict and violence. We will discover the different types of violence and how to name these types of violence. Then we will have a break. And when we'll start again, we will study the mechanism of violence, what you can do when you identify violence, and also what you can say to a victim. The aim of this training is to give basic key information to help you fight and end sexism and sexual violence. It's quite ambitious, so it's an intense training with lots of facts and exercises. So before we start, a very important trigger warning. Violence is a topic like no other. So this training is special. A training on violence can impact you in at least two different ways. First, we are going to talk about painful and difficult things that can affect your faith in humanity and could make you feel sad. Also, if you've been a victim or a witness of violence yourself, talking about it can bring past trauma to the surface. So there are three very important things to bear in mind. First, you can stop the training at any moment. You may feel your emotions rising. If you are overwhelmed, please just stop the training. The priority is to look after yourself first, and only then we can look after others. The second thing to protect each other is we will ask you not to share personal experiences. It's obviously personal experiences can be shared in the good places. We will share lots of numbers that can help you and find psychological support, but sharing personal experiences can be traumatizing. We, as trainers, we're not qualified to offer psychological support to victims. And you, as participants, you may be taken aback by some personal testimonies. So we also need to look after ourselves as a group. If you need personal support and if you need to talk, we will share flyers with phone numbers, email, live chat to get advice and assistance. And the last thing, very important things, is let's all be kind with each other. First, towards the trainers, who are all volunteers, and they've put lots of time and energy to bring this key training live. And also towards the participants who may have different knowledge and experience related to feminism. So let's remember, everyone is here to learn together. It's the first step towards a better world, and it's really fantastic. And
Hi.
To Amanda.
Hello, my name's Amanda, and I'm going to be delivering the key facts and figures for today. So why are we gathered here today? And is it still important that we talk about sexism and sexual violence in 2024 in the UK? Well, yeah, unfortunately it is. It's absolutely important. And we're going to start with the facts and figures just to prove it. When talking about sexism and sexual violence, it's important to have a series and sourced facts and figures. Why? Is to understand and show that sexism and sexual violence are still very much present and occurring systematically globally. So what should you do when you are asked questions and sharing facts and figures? It's important that you do not waste your time. You need to prioritise your battles. It's more effective to function in concentric circles. Start by convincing the people that you're close to, then talk to people a little bit further away. For example, trying to convince someone like Andrew Tate or Donald Trump would not only be extremely draining, but it would also probably fail. If someone is constantly opposing your ideas and does not want to hear you, it's better to move on. The key thing here is to be strategic and to avoid wasting time and energy. Don't use words such as never and always. For example, do not say women do 100% of the housework, as it can be contradicted, but say women take on a large majority of the domestic chores. Here is a quiz to show why sexism and sexual violence are relevant subjects to talk about in 2024 in the UK. So, key facts and figures. Question number 1. In the UK, women are still paid less than men. What is the gender pay gap, i.e. the difference in earning between men and women? Is it 4%, 14% or 24%? Okay. Just wait for everybody to put in their results, their answers. Okay, and yes, the answer is 14% less than men. And that's taken from the Trade Union Congress in 2023. So, question number 2. True or false? A third of women said they've experienced sexual harassment at work. Is that true or false? A third of women. Okay, the answer is false, actually. And the reason being, it's more than a third. It's 52% of women that have said they've experienced sexual harassment in work. Question number 3. In the UK, what is the proportion of LGBTQIA plus people who have avoided holding hands with the same-sex partner for fear of a negative reaction from others? Is it 2 in 3, 2 in 4, or 2 in 6? Yeah, the answer is 2/3 of people that have avoided holding hands for fear of negative reactions. We move on to the 4th question. True or false? 1 in 10 people's experiences domestic violence in their lifetime in the UK. That's true or false. 1 in 10 people experience domestic violence in their lifetime in the UK. It's false, unfortunately. It's more again, it is 1 in 5 adults that over 16 years of age that have experienced domestic abuse. Question number 5. In the UK, how many women have been raped or sexually assaulted? Is it 1 in 2, 1 in 4, or 1 in 8? Yep, the answer's 1 in 4. In fact, 85,000 women are raped every year. 1 in 6 children have been sexually abused or raped in the UK, and 1 in 18 men have been raped or sexually assaulted in the UK. Question number 6. This is a true or false question. 5 in 6 rapes against women are carried out by someone they know. Is that true or is that false? Yep, the answer's true. 5 in 6 rapes against women are carried out by someone they know. Half of the rapes against women are carried out by their partner or ex-partner. 98% of adults prosecuted for sexual offences are men. Question number 7. What is the proportion of women victims of a rape actually reporting it to the police? Is it 1 in 6, 3 in 6, or 5 in 6? Yeah, it's 1 in 6 women report a rape and only 1 in 5 men. Lots of these survivors tell someone else what happened, but they don't tell the police. The reasons being 40% said that they were embarrassed, 38% said they didn't think that the police could help, 34% said they thought it would be humiliating. And another fact that may be discouraging is less than 2 in 300 rapes recorded by police in 2022 resulted in a charge that same year, let alone a conviction. So question number 8. How many women were killed by men in 2020 in the UK? Was it 20, 32, or 110? Yeah, unfortunately, it's 110 women in 2020. Question number 9. Globally, how many women are married before the age of 18? And that's globally. Is it 1 in 5, 1 in 10, or 1 in 50? Yep. Again, 1 in 5 women under the age of 18 globally are married. And finally, the last question of the quiz, number 10. Worldwide, how many women are victims of violence in their lifetime? Is it 1 in 3, 1 in 6, or 1 in 10? And devastatingly, yes, it's 1 in 3. Women will be victims or are victims of violence in their lifetime. So the question is, thank you for taking part in that quiz. The question is are there more people at risk than others? Women are obviously a lot more exposed than others, and especially men. And all women can be victims of sexism and sexual violence. There are experiences shared by women globally, regardless of skin colour, social class, status, or sexual orientation. However, women who are part of marginalised groups or vulnerable communities are more at risk. Women of colour, women with disabilities, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer. LGBTQ+. Women with low income, homeless women, women who are sex workers, overweight women are all more at risk. And by saying all women are victims of violence, there's a risk of making the challenges faced by many women invisible. It's important to recognise that some women are more impacted by sexism and sexual violence due to the factors like social circumstances, sexual orientation, and skin colour. And this is called intersectionality. It highlights the importance of acknowledging inequalities and different experiences of violence among different groups of women. So here's an example. 1/3 of Black, Asian and minority ethnic LGBT people have experienced a hate crime or incident in the past 12 months, compared to 1 in 5 white LGBT people. So an LGBT person has more risks of being exposed to violence than a straight person. An LGBT person of colour has more risks than a white LGBT person to be exposed to violence. Discriminations add up. There are many interesting resources that discuss feminism and diversity. And Kimberly Crenshaw, for example, is a Black American feminist who theorised intersectionality. And if you want to read more about her, this is her name. You can see her picture on the PowerPoint. She writes some really interesting work, so do check her out. And that's that from Key Facts and Figures, and I'm going to hand over to Marie now. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. So good evening, everyone. My name is Marie, and I'm going to explain you now the difference between conflict and violence. So as Amanda just stressed, sexism and sexual violence are omnipresent in our society, so as these key figures have illustrated it. And you've heard the word violence quite a few times since the beginning of the training, so now it's time to define it more precisely and more specifically to talk about the difference between conflict and violence. And the reason why we need this is that, in fact, violence is often mistaken for conflict and vice versa. However, these two terms cover very different situations and have drastically different implications. So it is important to understand the difference between both in order to know how to deal with them. And this understanding, is key to finding the best tools to end violence. So to put it in a nutshell, when people are equal, it is a conflict. When they're not, it is violence. That is what the International Convention of Istanbul stated in 2011. So let me explain with an example. Imagine you have a fight with your partner, with a family member, with a colleague at work. It might get quite ugly, maybe even with some loud shouting, swearing. But does this necessarily mean that it is a situation of violence? Well, not always. So let's consider two cases. Case number one, a couple meets, falls in love. Sometimes they have disagreements along their relationship. One of them wants to go to the countryside. Let's say the other prefers the beach for the holidays. They may have conflicts about it and about other things, but they are not afraid of each other. Conflicts are normal, part of every relationship, and can be overcome by talking. Case number two, on the other hand, another couple meets, falls in love. Very early on in the relationship, inequality starts. One of them criticizes the other, who they are, what they do, while claiming that they love them. There is a controlling behavior, creating emotional dependency and low self-esteem. This relationship is not equal. One person is dominant, decides everything, and there is no reciprocity. That's basically the difference between conflict and violence. In a conflict, there can be shouting and swearing from both parts, but it is not violence, which is unilateral domination. Violence is forbidden by law, while conflict is not. Now, once we have said this, how to distinguish them in practice from one another? What are the characteristics of conflict and violence? So let's see together how to tell them apart with a short exercise. We are going to give you now 20-ish words, and I'd like you to identify which ones are linked with a situation of conflict and which ones are related to a violent situation. So you can take maybe a piece of paper and split it into 2 columns and put the words into the left one for conflict and into the right one for violence. And I'll give you, let's say, 2 minutes to do it. So here are the words. Word number 1, a single person controlling a situation. Well, words or sentences, maybe. A single person controlling a situation. Is that conflict? Is that violence? Word number 2, negotiation. Number 3, debate. Then we have domination, compromise, controlling behavior, interaction, submission, then shouting and swearing, listening, mutual disagreement, offense against physical integrity. Then we have fear, we have mutual cooling down, power, destructive aim, equality, and inequality. So try and classify them into, on one side, conflict, and on the other side, violence. So maybe just a few seconds more to give you time to split them. Okay, so maybe, well, let me know in the chat if you need more time, but I think that you can, if you have just put the numbers into 2 columns, we should be okay now. So let's see how you did and if you got it right. So here are the answers on the next slide. Thank you. And so let's see now. Let us know in the chat if you got it all right, and let's see how we can distinguish conflict and violence. In a conflict, first of all, on the left-hand side, there is negotiation. It is possible to find a solution by talking. There is debate. People are equal. They discuss, they can argue, they may disagree, but they interact fairly and freely. Compromise can be found. There is interaction, there is listening, there is mutual disagreement, and there is mutual cooling down. The tension may grow gradually as both people talk together and disagree. One person on their own does not decide on the disagreement when it starts and when it stops, and it takes 2 people to end a conflict. On the other hand, in a violent situation or violent relationship, there is a single person controlling the situation. It is always the same person who decides when the disagreement starts and when it stops. There is domination from one person over the other. There is controlling behavior from one person and submission of the other. There can also be offense against physical and moral integrity. There is fear. Generally, as soon as there is someone fearing someone else, it is the signal that the 2 partners are not on an equal footstep and that there is an abusive situation or relationship. There is destructive aim, and there is, in a word, inequality. Conflict and violent situations have, however, things in common, and that's why it's not always easy to see the difference. because conflict can take a violent form. In both cases, there can be shouting and swearing. If two people are having a conversation and communicating or shouting at the same level, then they might be equal and it's a conflict. On the other hand, if one person is shouting and overpowering and the other person feels threatened, then they are not equal and it's violence. Both situations, conflict and violence, can also involve dynamic of power. Power is in every human relationship, at home, within the family, at work, with friends. But in a violent relationship, power will take more space and will always come from the same person. So what I'm telling you here are tools to identify situations of violence, and there is, of course, lots of nuances to bring depending on the context. But there are some easy questions that can help you to identify if a situation is conflicting or violent. First one is, are you afraid of the person? Second question is it always the same person starting an argument? And the last one, is it always the same person shouting? So to conclude, as we said since the very beginning, in a conflict, there is equality between the people involved. In a situation of violence, there is no equality. Someone is dominant and controls the situation, and someone else has to submit to it. So that's it for the difference between conflict and violence. And now that we understand better what violence is, we'll dive into the different types of violence. So I let Anaë present them to you.
Thanks, Marie. Hey everyone, my name is Anaë. My pronouns are she, they, and I'm going to talk to you about the different types of violence today. Remember, if you want to step away at any time, that's completely fine. And if you need a bit of a break, we'll have a break in about 25-30 minutes. All right, so let's get started. So there are 6 different types of violence related to sexism and sexual violence that can be identified. It's not a legal categorization. It's more a practical tool to label and differentiate different types of violence. So the goal is to allow people to overcome dismissal or denial, and that will hopefully help and sexism and sexual violence better. Sometimes types of violence can fit into several categories, so the categories are not exclusive of each other. And before I start explaining all the examples, I thought we could just do a little bit of an exercise, which is we can try and find an example for each type of violence. So you can see them on the screen at the moment. There's administrative violence, economical violence, psychological violence, gynecological violence, I got it, Amanda, physical violence, and sexual violence. So for example, physical violence, an example that would probably come to mind for most people when thinking about physical violence would be hitting someone. So we're going to start with administrative violence. Feel free to put any example that you can think of or anything that it makes you think of when you think of administrative violence in the chat. I'll give you maybe like 15 seconds and then I'll give you a definition and go through some of examples. It's not the easiest one to start with, I have to say. I can't see anything, so I'll get started. So administrative violence is controlling money. That's interesting. So I believe controlling money sits more into the economic violence category, but you can also control money, and that's an example of how 2 categories can kind of sometimes overlap. You can control someone's access to money by through administrative violence. So for example, withholding someone's passport is one. Yeah, exactly. Retention of identity.
There is an example from Coralie saying retention of identity.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
So
that's perfect. That's exactly that's the exact example we needed. So withholding someone's passport is one. So any identity papers as well. Refusing the right to grant someone citizenship denying someone the right to change their name or to change their gender, refusing to take a complaint from someone. These are all administrative violence. And what administrative violence is a mechanism through which structural inequality is reproduced legally. The next one is economic violence. So economic violence is any act or behavior which causes economic harm to an individual. Is there any example that comes to mind? Please feel free to put them in the chat. Yep, financial abuse is definitely part of that. Controlling expenditures of someone, that's exactly, or of the household is one.
Tracy
Slavery or
withholding
enslavement.
bank cards as well.
What did you say? Sorry.
Tracy saying withholding bank cards.
Yeah, withholding. Yep, you're completely right as well. Slavery or enslavement is a bit different. It does fit into economic violence in the idea of economic violence, because it does cause economic harm, but enslavement is its own part, legally it's its own crime. Economic blackmail to coerce someone into doing something is one, and it's also part of psychological violence, Coralie, so you're completely right. Again, it overlaps. So some examples have been said in the chat, but other examples are checking someone's bank account, forcing someone to work part-time or to not work at all. We did say spending someone... No, we did not say that. Accessing and spending someone else's salary. So that's another one. And some people think that the fact that women being paid less than men in the workplace can also be considered a form of economic violence. Next one is psychological violence. So psychological violence is any intentional conduct that seriously impairs another person's psychological integrity through coercion or threats. Any example that comes to mind, please feel free to, yep, gaslighting is exactly, yeah, it's an act of psychological violence. Isolation is definitely one as well. Emotional abuse is another one. That's a great example, actually. Manipulation, humiliation are also part of the list that we're going to show you in a second. Oh, sleep deprivation is one. Persistent criticism definitely is. All right, yes, so some of these have been already said in the chat. So humiliation is one, insulting or criticizing constantly, breaking or damaging someone else's property. Neglect, yes. Not letting someone sleep, refusing to talk, gaslighting. So if anybody is wondering what gaslighting means, it means manipulating someone into doubting their own sanity. And moral harassment is one, so very close to persistent criticism as well. All right, let's move on, and you're really good at this. So physical violence. So physical violence is when an individual or a group attacks or threatens to attack someone physically. The example I gave earlier was hitting someone, which seemed quite obvious and comes to mind to most of us, but there are other examples of physical violence. Right, let's move on to the list then. So we got hitting, beatings, yep, slaps, all of this, burning, biting, strangling, throwing objects at someone, kidnapping is part of that as well. And yeah, that's it. All right, so the next one is gynecological violence. Which is a violence that is sometimes seen as a systemic violence, it can take place into the healthcare settings most of the time and during gynecological or obstetric consultations. For example, doing a gynecological procedure without someone's consent is one. Or forced sterilization is one. Forcing an abortion is one. Denying someone an abortion is also one. And the last one is sexual violence. So sexual violence is any sexual act, attempt to obtain a sexual act or other act directed against a person's sexuality using coercion. So is there anything? So I can see Jenna's rape. That's why I didn't say anything, because we had the sexual violence coming. So now it makes sense where it fits, but it also fits exactly like Joanna is saying into the physical category. So that's another example when both overlap. Any other example come to mind for sexual violence? Yeah. Forcing someone to watch a sexual act is one. Revenge porn is one. Right, so you are completely right about these. So the first one that we mentioned was rape or attempting rape. We also have sexual aggression, sexual assault, sexual harassment. We have revenge porn, genital mutilation, forced marriage, forced prostitution, and cyber violence when it's around sexual content. So all of the forms of violence that have been mentioned so far are obviously punishable by law. It's very important to understand that none of these are allowed to happen, and then all of these are against the law. So to summarize the 6 types of violence that we went through, the first one is administrative violence. Second one, economical violence. Third one, psychological violence. Fourth one, gynecological violence. Physical violence. And the last one we just mentioned was sexual violence. Right, so now that we've gone through this, I'm going to let Amanda take over for how to name the types of violence.
Thank you. Now, this is the last session before the break. So the break will be in 15 minutes' time. We're going to look at how to name the types of violence. So why is it important to name them? And do we know how to qualify violence to make sure we do it, to make sure that we don't dismiss or deny them when they happen? That's why it's important that we actually give them a name. We represent these in what we call a pyramid, and the pyramid represents the wide variety of harm that regularly exists in our society. Sexual violence is built upon a foundation of underlying factors and attitudes to enable the perpetrator to do it. So it shows that some forms of violence are interlinked. So if you look at rape and harassment, they're 2 very different types of violence, but they're related by what is called the continuum of violence of the rape culture. So what does the rape culture mean? It's the behaviours and beliefs shared by a society that have the effect of dismissing, denying, or even encouraging sexual violence. And there's some examples of our rape culture. So if we look at pop songs and elements of our advertising, representations in media, they make people believe that some of these things are acceptable when in actual fact they're illegal acts that are being portrayed. When someone complains about sexist comments and people call them jokes or it's just banter, that's people being in denial that actually that's a sexist comment. When someone reports rape and people doubt their words or question how they were dressed, they say, "Oh, it's not that bad." Again, that means that we're in denial. The perpetrator is always responsible for the violence they commit, but society can play a role to either call out and stop the violence or dismiss it and discourage it. Rape culture doesn't directly cause someone to commit rape, but it creates an environment where sexual violence is normalised victims are blamed and perpetrators may feel entitled to exert control over others' bodies. In a society where perpetrators are not held accountable for their actions, individuals may think that they can commit acts of sexual violence with a reduced fear of consequences. The lack of accountability, it resources the idea of sexual violence is permissible or acceptable, which it obviously isn't. To prevent the escalation of violence, it's important that those who commit it are held responsible, and this helps address the culture that allows violence to happen. A good example of the continuum of violence would be the Sarah Everard example and Wayne Couzens. He's a policeman and he worked in the police station, and he was well known for sexually harassing members of staff in the police station. He was actually given a nickname of the rapist while he was there. He then went on to indecently expose himself out in the community. And then from then on, he went on and he met Sarah and raped and murdered her. So that would be a clear example of a continuum of violence. The perpetrator is always responsible for the violence. And we're going to look at different types of violence. So sex discrimination, harassment and sexual harassment, victimization, direct discrimination, and indirect discrimination. These are as defined by the Equalities Act in 2010. There are 4 types of sex discrimination. There's the indirect sex discrimination, and that's when a rule puts either men or women at an unfair disadvantage in the workplace. So an example of this would be requiring all employees at work to work full time. A lot more women have caring responsibilities for young children or dependent adults, so they'd find it much more difficult than men to work full time. So that's one example. Another example would be only giving mortgages to people who work full time. So if women aren't able to because of their home circumstances, that would be an unfair disadvantage. This is likely to mean that less women than men will be given a mortgage, as more women than men work part-time. Direct sex discrimination is the next one. And that's when a person treats someone unfairly because of their gender. If sex discrimination takes place in any of the following situations, it's illegal. So, for example, the workplace, places of education, and when using public services, such as transport. Examples of this would be refusing credit to a married woman without her husband's signature, while a married man is not required to have his wife's signature. Refusing to accept a woman's salary as a basis for a mortgage because of her sex. And advertising a job as a waiter, that gives the impression that the job is only open to men. Sex discrimination does not need to be deliberate, and someone may be discriminating without even realising it or meaning to, but it might still be counted as discrimination. The next one we have is harassment and sexual harassment. Harassment is when a person displays behaviour related to someone's gender or an unwanted conduct of a sexual nature that has the purpose or effect of violating someone's dignity, or creates an intimidating, hostile, degrading, humiliating, or offensive environment. An example of this would be commenting that there's no point in promoting women because they're only going to go off and have children. Sexual harassment, however, is when a person has unwanted sexual behaviour towards another person that makes them feel upset, scared, offended, or humiliated. It covers verbal and physical treatment, as well as non-verbal. So examples of this would be sexual comments or noise, catcalling, wolf whistling. Sexual gestures, that would be a non-verbal type. Leering, staring, or suggestive looks, again non-verbal, but that can include someone looking up and someone up and down. Sexual jokes, unwanted sexual advances or flirting. Sexual requests or asking for sexual favours. Cyber flashing, sending images with sexual content, for example, dick pics. And that's recently been added as a crime. And most recently, the first cyber flashing case went to court, and someone I think it's only about 3 weeks ago, was sentenced to 66 days in prison for sending for cyber flashing and sending pictures of their genitals. Sexual posts or contacts on social media, intrusive questions about a person's private or sex life, someone discussing their own sex life in front of others is also sexual harassment. Commenting on someone's body, their appearance, what they're wearing, spreading sexual rumours, displaying images of a sexual nature. Then there's unwanted sexual contact of a sexual nature. For example, brushing up against someone or hugging, kissing, or massaging them. Stalking, indecent exposure, and taking a photo or video under another person's clothing, what is known as upskirting. We then move on to victimisation. And that is when a person treats someone unfairly because they've complained about discrimination or harassment. So that would include someone when they're not talking to someone, maybe in the office, because someone complains about a work group chat that shares memes of objectifying women. So that would be classified as treating someone less favourably and victimisation. And then we have sexual offences. So in this, we have the rape, assault by penetration, and sexual assault. Sexual offences are defined in the Sexual Offences Act in 2003, and sexual assault is defined as when a person intentionally touches another person sexually without their consent. The touching can be done with any part of the body or with an object. An example of this might be if you were in a restaurant and somebody touched you with the menu on your chest area, for example, that could be classified as sexual assault, but using an object rather than parts of their body. Other examples will be forced kissing, attempted rape, touching someone's breasts or genitals, including through the clothing, touching any other part of the body for sexual pleasure or in a sexual manner. For example, stroking someone's thigh or rubbing their neck, pressing up against another person for sexual pleasure, pressuring, manipulating, or scaring someone into performing a sexual act on the perpetrator, touching someone's clothing, if it's done for sexual pleasure or in a sexual manner, for example, lifting up someone's skirt, and causing a person to engage in sexual activity without their consent. We then move on to assault by penetration. This is when a person intentionally penetrates the vagina or anus of a person with any part of their body or an object without their consent. An example of this would be putting a finger into someone's vagina. And then we have rape. When a person uses their penis to penetrate the vagina, mouth, or anus of another person without their consent. Legally, a person without a penis cannot commit rape, but a female may be guilty of rape if they assist a male perpetrator in an attack. And it's important to note that these are legal classifications from the point of view of the law. From the point of view of the victim, however, any penetration with a penis or any part of the body or an object can be experienced as rape. Examples of this would be forcing a partner to have sex and stealthing. Stealthing is when someone lies about putting a condom on, or when they put a condom on, but then they remove it without the other person's knowledge and permission. Right, we are going to now move on to a quiz again. So what I'd like you to do in this quiz is identify the type of violence that you see in each scene, in each scenario. Okay, so the first question. He slaps her bottom by surprise. Is this harassment, sexual assault, sexual harassment, or direct sex discrimination? Which one will you choose? Yep, it is classified as sexual assault. The fact that he's actually touched her physically is sexual assault. Thank you. Number 2. At work, he says to his colleague, "Hey, could you prepare some coffee for us?" That shouldn't be too difficult for a woman. Is it harassment, sexual assault, sexual harassment, or victimization? Yep, it's classified as harassment. Thank you. It's Monday. Nice cleavage. Is it an invitation? Tuesday. You seem exhausted. You didn't get too much sleep last night, did you? Wednesday. Nice bum. Is that harassment? Sexual harassment, sexual assault, or indirect sex discrimination? Yeah, absolutely. It is sexual harassment. And it's important to remember that you don't have to be the person that the harassment is aimed at. You can just be a witness to it, and it can still be classified as sexual harassment for yourself because you're offended by that. So if you're in an office and you overhear someone talking like that, then you're being sexually harassed as well. Okay, next one. He introduces an object into her vagina without her consent. Is it sexual assault, assault by penetration, sexual harassment, or rape? Yeah, it's assault by penetration. However, the victim might believe, and will rightly believe, that she's been raped, or he's been raped, or they've been raped. Their boyfriend forces them to give a blowjob. Is it sexual assault, rape, assault by penetration, or sexual harassment? Yep, again, that's rape. Catcalling or wolf whistling? Is it harassment, sexual harassment, victimization, or indirect sexual discrimination? Sex discrimination. Yep, sexual harassment again. They're not talking to him anymore as he complained about sexist jokes his colleagues made. Is that harassment, victimization, direct sex discrimination, or sexual harassment? Yeah, victimization. Absolutely. Being treated less favourably. He sends her a dick pic. Sexual harassment, direct sex discrimination, harassment, or sexual assault? Yeah, it's sexual harassment, and that's cyber flashing. And that's basically, that comes from the same kind of thing that people used to expose themselves in the community. They're doing exactly the same thing, but they're using their phone, for example, to do it. It's cyber flashing. Yep, sexual harassment. She invites her for a drink and maybe more, and she accepted. Is that sexual harassment, discrimination, a date, or flirting? Yeah, most definitely it's a date or it's flirting. It's not complicated to distinguish between what harassment is and flirting. And it's not a difference of degree, but a difference of nature between the two. So when someone's flirting, there is consent and respect for the other person. In harassment, there is no notion of consent and a no isn't heard. So how do you know when there's consent? Well, when you're in doubt, the best thing that anybody can do is to say, do you consent to this? Now, consent is a full yes. If there's silence or if there's doubt, it's not considered consent. In other words, if it's a no, it's a no. And if it's a yes, and if it's not a yes, it is still a no. We're going to watch a short clip now, which is consent. It's as simple as tea. Some of you might know this short film, but this really does explain very easily for people to understand what consent is and why it's important.
If you're still struggling with consent, just imagine instead of initiating sex, you're making them a cup of tea. You say, "Hey, would you like a cup of tea?" And they go, "Oh my God, I would love a cup of tea. Thank you." Then you know they want a cup of tea. If you say, "Hey, would you like a cup of tea?" And they're like, I'm not really sure. Then you can make them a cup of tea or not, but be aware that they might not drink it. And if they don't drink it, then, and this is the important bit, don't make them drink it. Just because you made it doesn't mean you're entitled to watch them drink it. And if they say, "No, thank you," then don't make them tea at all. Just don't make them tea. Don't make them drink tea. Don't get annoyed at them for not wanting tea. They just don't want tea, okay? They might say, "Yes, please, that's kind of you." And then when the tea arrives, they actually don't want the tea at all. Sure, that's kind of annoying as you've gone to all the effort of making the tea, but they remain under no obligation to drink the tea. They did want tea, now they don't. Some people change their mind in the time it takes to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk. And it's okay for people to change their mind, and you are still not entitled to watch them drink it. And if they're unconscious, don't make them tea. Unconscious people don't want tea, and they can't answer the question, "Do you want tea?" because they're unconscious. Okay, maybe they were conscious when you asked them if they wanted tea, and they said yes, but in the time it took you to boil the kettle or brew the tea and add the milk, they are now unconscious. You should just put the tea down, make sure the unconscious person is safe, and this is the important part again, don't make them drink the tea. They said yes then, sure, but unconscious people don't want tea. If someone said yes to tea, started drinking it, and then passed out before they'd finished it, don't keep on pouring it down their throat. Take the tea away. Make sure they are safe, because unconscious people don't want tea. Trust me on this. If someone said yes to tea around your house last Saturday, that doesn't mean they want you to make them tea all the time. They don't want you to come around to their place unexpectedly and make them tea and force them to drink it, going, "But you wanted tea last week," or to wake up to find you pouring tea down their throat going, "But you wanted tea last night." If you can understand how completely ludicrous it is to force people to have tea when they don't want tea, and you are able to understand when people don't want tea, then how hard is it to understand when it comes to sex? Whether it's tea or sex, consent is everything. And on that note, I'm going to make myself a cup of tea.
And on that note, it's now time for you to be able to go and make yourself a cup of tea or get yourself a drink of some description.
Hi to everyone, and we'll start again. So we are now, so we'll start again. We've done the first half of our training, and we're now entering the second part of the training, which provides practical tools to identify and stop violence. So the first, so we'll talk about the mechanism of violence, what you can do when you identify violence, and also what you can say to a victim. So we will start with the mechanism of violence. Every story of violence is different, obviously, but they all have in common some mechanism of violence in the behavior of the perpetrator. And there are 5 mechanisms of violence that can be identified. So we'll see together what are these 5 mechanisms of violence that can help you to recognize violence. So there are 5 of them. The first one is isolation. Actually, some of you mentioned it earlier on when we were talking about the different types of violence. So in every story of violence, at one point or another, the victim is being isolated. So some example of that would be, for example, at work, oh, sorry, I forgot to invite you to the team seminar. There must have been a glitch. Or in a romantic relationship, it would be something like, well, you see your friends quite a lot these days. You love them more than you love me. You should not see them that much. Or are you always with your sister? Like that could be isolation. The second mechanism of violence is criticism. Again, that's something that you mentioned when we talked about the different types of violence earlier on. Criticism could be about the way the victim looks or work. So at work could look like, oh, if I had known, I would not have hired you. Or in a romantic relationship, could be like, oh, you could make an effort. Look at how your friends dress. Or you don't understand anything, do you? I wish I hadn't ended up with someone like you. So that was for criticism. The third mechanism of violence is inversion of guilt. The perpetrator will make the victim think that the violence taking place is their fault, when we should know that no one is ever responsible for the violence they receive. So an example of inversion of guilt at work would be like, oh, sorry, I shouted at you during the meeting. I shouldn't have, but honestly, your presentation was a half-done job. So here you can see the person is trying to make the victim responsible when they are not. Another example was like, oh, well, you forced him to act this way. You're right, he shouldn't have touched your butt, but seriously, look at the length of your skirt. Obviously, no length of any skirt is ever an example, a reason to be touched without consent. An example of inversion of guilt in a romantic relationship would be, okay, I admit I should not have shouted and thrown things around, but your lasagna was really disgusting. Again, no lasagna could be responsible for violence. No broccoli could be either. Fourth one is threat and violence. So threat and violence are the fourth mechanism of violence. It's when the perpetrator purposely scares the victim. It's a major sign of danger because it's never normal to be scared of someone. Whether it's at work, with family, or at home, it's never normal. When someone is scared, they have to remember that they're not the problem. It's the other person who is the problem. Being scared is a survival message received by the brain saying, be careful, something is wrong. So do trust your brain. If you're scared, there is often a reason. And the fifth mechanism of violence is ensuring the perpetrator's impunity. So that's when the perpetrator acts as if there's a perfect person. So for example, sending flowers at someone's office. I mean, if you receive flowers in your office, it doesn't mean your partner is violent. But if they do so, and at the same time they are being violent but don't want to look like that in public, it does make it more difficult for the victim to talk and to be believed. So it can be a mechanism of violence. An important thing to note about the mechanism of violence is that they are not in all the experiences of violence, and they are also not always in the same order, and they are not always there. These 5 mechanisms, they are tools to identify violence. And if in a relationship you find 2 or 3 of these mechanisms, then it's a signal that there is probably a problem. So now we will do a little exercise. I'll give you 5 sentences with mechanism of violence being used, and you will need to link each sentence with a mechanism of violence. And again, we will use the chat to do so. So let's try to identify in the 5 following sentences which mechanism of violence is being used. So for the first one, is, no wonder I get upset. see how you behave. Do you want maybe to put in the chat what mechanism of violence you think it is? Would that be isolation, criticism, inversion of guilt, threat and fear, or ensuring the perpetrator's impunity? So no wonder I get upset. See how you behave. What do you think that is? I'll give you just a tiny bit longer. And it is indeed inversion of guilt. The second sentence, don't eat that much, you will end up looking like a pig. What mechanism of violence? I see some eyes rolling and I roll it with you. What do you think this is? Yes, it is indeed criticism. Third one, someone saying to their friend, oh, I took some days off to take care of her. So again, obviously that's in a context of violence, not in case of any person taking days off. What would that mean? I took some days off to take care of her. Yes, I don't think it's isolation. I think here it's more ensuring the perpetrator's impunity, trying to look good so the victim can't complain. The fourth one is, you see your friends a lot. Are you ignoring me? What would this one be? That's indeed isolation. And the fifth and last one, I could hit harder if you talk to your friends about it, What is this one? That's indeed threat and fear. Well, you're very switched on tonight. I think you've understood the mechanism of violence. So now we can move to the next part of our training, which is what can you do when you identify violence?
Which is me again. Thanks, Clémence. Right, so what can you do if you witness violence? So just to let you know, there's about 27 minutes left of the training. So just to let you know where we're at. So what's the best tool to identify violence, in your opinion? Before we even talk about what you can do, it's really important that we talk about how we can identify violence. So is it the ears, so in listening, the eyes, watching, or the mouth, talking? And as we just saw on the slide, the best tool to identify violence is actually not the ears or the eyes. It's not just like looking and listening for things. It's not even the brain in terms of like thinking about what's happening. It's actually the mouth. So what we mean by that is by communicating with someone, by talking or signing with someone, you can actually identify what's going on, and by identifying what's going on, you can help ending it. So with your mouth, you can ask someone if they are being abused. You can ask the question. So have you been a victim of violence is actually a very simple question, but you can ask. It may seem very complicated to ask someone if they are a victim of violence because it's something that we don't tend to do much in our society, but it's actually not. And it's cheap, it's effective, and it's quite fast. So it's the best tool to stop violence, really. There are millions of people in this country whose lives would be saved or changed if someone had asked their question, have you been a victim of violence? This is a very powerful question. However, in some professional contexts, so for example, in schools, social work, directly asking the question is not allowed. This is considered as a leading question. So it's considered problematic if the case goes to court. But if you're talking in, with a friend, a colleague, a partner, for example, this direct question could actually save their life. The victim has then the right to decide to answer or not. It's okay if they don't want to talk about it. It's essential to respect their choice and their timing. It might be worrying for you, frustrating for you, but it's not about you anymore. At that point, it's about their choice. And there are only two conditions under which you can overrule the victim's choice and call the police. So if you think the person is in mortal danger, you can decide, even if they tell you no, you can decide to call the police. You should call the police. And if children are in danger, it's the same situation. So you can call the police even if the person tells you not to do it. Otherwise, do not take their place. So if you speak for them, what happens is that you may send the message that they're not capable of doing it themselves. And for a lot of people, they might feel devalued. And if they do not want to talk, it's still okay. Because you asked, you gave them the opportunity to talk at that point, but you also sending the message that if they want to talk about it, whether it's next week, the week after, in a year, then you are the right person to turn to because you are available, you are trained to listen, and you want to listen to what they have to say. So what happens then if you witness harassment or violence in front of you? What should you do? There's actually something very powerful. It's called the 5 Ds. It's very, very simple to remember, and it's something that is called bystander action. So what means by that, and some people actually are using upstander now. What is important to remember here is that your safety is always your priority. So even if you decide to act, you need to first think, am I putting myself at risk here? And make a choice after asking this question to yourself. So pause and assess the situation. Is it safe to act? Are you with other people or are you alone? Are there other people who could help you? And what action could you take that are unlikely to put anyone in danger? Right, so the 5 Ds go like this: distract, delegate, document, delay, and direct. So the first one is distract. What distract is interrupting what's happening. So for example, you could talk to the person that is being targeted. You could pretend to know them, for example, or ask for the time. You could make a scene. If you're in let's say a coffee shop, you could spill your drink. You could continue what you're doing, but put yourself physically between the perpetrator and the person that they are targeting. Now, there's 2 rules to follow if you do this. The first one is do not talk to the perpetrator. Engage with the person that is being harassed. And the second one is don't refer to the harassment that is happening. Talk about something completely different. Like the time is a good one, for example. So that's distract. The second one is delegate, and that's asking someone for help. So for example, you see a teacher, the train driver, although getting to a train driver might be a bit hard, but a bus driver might be easier. Security guard, or a manager of a shop, for example. Anyone else who might work in the place where you are. Anyone passing by. Or the emergency services. So remember, if you're calling the emergency services, you have to ask the person that is the victim there, because without their authorization, unless they are in mortal danger, you shouldn't do this. The rules to follow for delegating are: you need to find someone that is ready and willing to help. And you need to be clear when you delegate. So you need to tell them what you need to do, what you expect of them. So that's delegate. And the third D is document. So document, it means recording what's happening. Nowadays, most of us take our phone everywhere. So you can take pictures, videos, note down the details. For example, the date and time and place when it happened. And this is going to help you. That's going to help the person that is being targeted in case they want to report what happened. And when you do take video photos or anything like this, you need to then ask the person, do you want me to share that with you? The rules to follow is only try to document if someone else is already helping in another way. So if they're not, then try to delegate or to distract first. Then also you need to check with the person if they would like to document to document the situation. If they say no, then you don't do it. And never post or use without the permission of the person being targeted. So far we've got distract, delegate, document, and the fourth one is delay. That's by checking in with the person who was targeted and offer to help. There's something very easy to do is just asking, are you okay? Or can I do anything to help you? Or can I stay with you or help you to get somewhere? You can also say, I'm sorry that happened to you, or what just happened wasn't okay. It's about checking in, offering help, and sharing resources if you can. And the fifth one is direct. So respond directly to what's happening. Now, this one is very important. It's very important to think about your priority first. What direct is, for example, calling out the perpetrator. So, hey, that's sexist. Hey, that's sexual harassment. Stop what you're doing. Leave them alone. You can't do that. Now, because this is risky, we need to think and pause and assess, because the perpetrator's action could get worse by being called out, and they could also turn on you or others. You need to be brief and accurate. You need to not exaggerate anything. You need to state facts. And also, it's very important to speak calmly and politely, which is not always easy in this situation, and avoid arguing. So to sum up the 5 Ds, the first one was distract, second, delegate, third, document, fourth, delay, and fifth, direct. So we're going to go through a little bit of an exercise now, which is, what's your superpower? So how would you react to the scene that we're going to show you? And which of the 5 Ds would you choose? You can choose several of them. That's completely fine. But before we start any of this, I need to let you know that this video may contain material that might be disturbing to you. And if that's the case, you can feel free to walk away. It's a scene of sexual harassment and sexual assault, actually. So if you do not feel like you want to see this, please step away. That's completely fine. If at any point it makes you feel disturbed or any kind of feeling that are not positive feelings, then feel free to step away as well. Right, so I'm going to show you the scene, and then in the chat, feel free to put the 5 Ds that any of the 5 Ds that you would use in that situation.
We've got to have a dream. We've got to have a dream. Now you gonna make a dream come true.
What are you doing? This is nothing on me.
Okay, so that was very, very quick, very fast. Which 5 Ds would you use in that situation? So you've got distract, delegate, you've got delay, you've got direct, you've got document. Which one would you use? And you can also explain why in the chat if you would like. I'll give you a bit of a bit of time to answer in the chat. Now, while you're doing this, I'm going to talk quickly about the bystander effect, because I think that suits very well this scene. You see, there's so many people on that bus, but no one reacts. And that's what in psychology is called the bystander effect, which basically says that it's a theory against which people are saying that the more there are people in this place, the less likely someone is to intervene, and the more people are likely to say nothing when something wrong happens. This is why it's so important to follow the 5Ds and to interact in that situation or to act in that situation. Okay, so Coralie would use direct, and he says delay and delegate, check the woman was okay, then seek help from the bus driver. I like the seeking help of the bus driver, for example, the person of authority in that situation. Direct, yeah, you could talk to the person, but remember direct comes if it's safe in that situation and also if there's people around to help. Right. So if you're a victim of harassment yourself, what should you do? Oh, I like Tracy's answer as well. If you're a victim, follow your instinct. There is never a right or perfect way to react. Studies show, however, that when you react to violence, it can reduce the trauma. And if you react, believe in your instinct. Then reclaim your space. If you decide to react, state to the perpetrator what is happening and why you're not okay with it. Involve the people around you, stating what is happening and how they can help you. Again, going against that bystander effect. Document the situation. Then take time to heal. You're never responsible for being harassed. The perfect reaction to harassment does not exist. After experiencing harassment, you need to take the time to recover. Listen to yourself. Listen to your needs. And most of all, be kind to yourself. Right, so I'm going to hand over to Marie, I believe, for about what to say to a victim of violence.
Thank you, Anna. So yes, now that we've seen how to react at the moment, let's say when we witness a situation of harassment or more generally a situation of violence, let's see what to say to a victim of violence. Because witnessing or identifying violence is one thing. However, it's not the only way we can become aware of a violent situation. Basically, a victim of violence, be it a friend, family member, colleague, or a person you've only just met can open up to you about it. And it's good to be aware of what we can do or say in that case. And as you can read here, the goal will be to reverse the mechanisms of violence that Clémence presented earlier. There are 5 very simple sentences that you can tell to a victim of violence, each of them reversing one mechanism. So as a reminder, here are the 5 mechanisms of violence we presented before. There is isolation, there is criticism, inversion of guilt, there is threat and fear, and there is ensuring the impunity of the perpetrator. So what do we say to reverse each of these mechanisms? Here are 5 simple sentences that will each help to reverse one of them. First of all, to reverse isolation, you can say, I believe you. And by doing so, you create some link with the victim, with the person who just talked to you. You show them that you are on their side. I believe you. Then to reverse criticism, you can say, you were right to tell me about it, or you were brave to tell me about it. Let's make them feel good about themselves and their decision to tell us about the situation and let them know that it was the right thing to do. Then to put back the guilt where it should be, you can say it is not your fault. They are guilty. The perpetrator are guilty. Let's remind them that they are not and will never be responsible for what happened. They did not do anything wrong. The guilt is on the perpetrator of violence and only on them. Then to stop the fear, we can say it's against the law. Let's show them that they are protected in a legal, institutional way. And finally, to break the impunity, you can say you are not alone. Let's convince them that things can change and that we are on their side. So these 5 sentences are key and we should all learn them by heart. And for most victims, it is the first time in their life that they hear them when you say them to them. And even feminists and activists who heard these sentences before and who are trained on sexism and sexual violence need to hear these sentences again when they are victims of violence. They are always important and they are always helpful. So what I'd like you to do now, before we finish this training, is to do, well, it's not really an exercise, it's more like a way to learn these sentences, these key, very important sentences by heart. What I'd like you to do now is to unmute your mic and repeat the sentences after me. So to unmute, you should all be muted now, but you can unmute yourself by clicking the microphone icon on the bottom left of the Zoom window. Yeah, I see that some of them already are doing it. Great. So I will say the 5 sentences once, all in a round, and then we'll say them out loud all together. Not only to learn them, but also so we feel how powerful they can be. So ready? By the time that you all unmute yourself, I will read them once. First is, I believe you. You were brave to tell me about it. It is not your fault. It's against the law. You are not alone. So everyone ready? Give me a bit ready in the chat if you are. And 1, 2, 3. Let's go. I believe you.
You are brave to tell me about it.
It is not your fault.
It's not your fault.
It's against the law.
You are not alone.
You're not alone.
You are not alone.
Great. Let's do it one more time. I believe you.
I believe you.
You are brave to tell me about it.
It's not your fault.
It's
against the law.
You are not alone.
Great.
Cool. So yeah, we've now reached the end of our training session. If you want to support us further, you can follow us on Instagram, on LinkedIn, on Facebook. Please talk about this event and increase our visibility. Again, we're still young and shiny, so all the help and visibility we get is incredibly valuable. So you can follow us. You have our Insta here, but we have most of the social media. And I think to finish, I think we all want to say a massive thank you. First to the organizers who spent so much time and energy to put this training together. So thank you, Amanda, Anae, Joanna, Marie, and many people who worked in the background for it as well. And thank you to everyone here. You just gave 2 hours of your time to end sexism and sexual violence and to make this world a better place. You're absolutely amazing. So thank you very much to everyone. We'll stop here. I mean, the togetHER people will hang around for a little bit. So if you want to talk to us in a more private setting, feel free to stay and ask a few questions. And otherwise, have a great evening. And thank you so very much to all of you.
Thank you.